My favorite white pizza.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the much awaited. You guys just can't wait for another episode of Political Animals, where we always bring you an analytical and, for my part, cynical view of what's happening around the world. We have Afolabi, who's just neutral. He doesn't know. He's in Lagos, Nigeria. How's it going, Afolabi?
Very well, very well.
Okay, and we have Kunle Williams, who's too hopeful about the world. How's it going, Kunle, in Lagos, Nigeria?
It's going fantastic. I'm enjoying the incidents in Glastonbury very much. So.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. So, Afolabi, tell us what's going on with Ukraine. Tell us the truth. What's going on with Ukraine?
Yes.
Yeah, basically Ukraine is screwed, and from the look of things, they are experiencing a lot of substantial military setbacks, including the loss of an F-16 fighter jet and its pilot. Basically, This signals increasing vulnerability in Ukrainian air defenses, and it just confirms our worst fears that Ukraine is basically fucked right now.
Okay, they're done. They're absolutely done. And from what I understand, what else has been going on? I think Trump said, first of all, that Europe has to put 5% of their GDP towards NATO and towards the war effort. And it looks like he's really just trying to pull out because his focus now is supposedly in the Middle East, if anywhere. He might not even be focused on the Middle East anymore. I think Trump wants to go back to domestic politics and get all of this rubbish over with before it weighs down his presidency. So what are the details? I know you did some more in-depth research since you're our Ukraine expert. What's going on with the money issue for Europe? Are they going to be able to continue funding this war?
It's going to be difficult for America because right now, Donald Trump is trying to rebuild his battered MAGA base. So any unnecessary spending in the Ukraine-Russian war will not be tolerated. Basically, NATO also is looking for support from America because Ukraine looks very vulnerable right now. And the NATO members are not united in taking a unanimous decision to support Ukraine. And inside the United States, Donald Trump is facing a lot of pressure, especially from the Democrats and internally. So this doesn't look well for Ukraine. And it doesn't look like the United States is going to support Ukraine financially as it used to do under Biden anytime soon. So this looks very, very ugly for Ukraine, basically.
Yeah, and Russia's is stepping up the attack. I hear the NATO scrambling fighter jets because they're ramping it up. And I think Putin can smell blood because NATO's not that they're in disarray, but they just can't afford this. You know how much money they've spent on just fueling these American planes that were going to bomb Iran and on getting weapons to Israel? Because we have to remember the whole base of NATO's funding comes from the U.S. and they're in overdrive with this issue with Israel and the war in Ukraine. So it's just too much. They're going to have to back off. And that's bad news for Ukraine. But this is the war that Europe started. They got their war. I don't know how they're going to be able to fund. They said they want to raise billions of dollars for their defense. I don't know where the money is going to come from. What are your thoughts, Kunle?
Yeah, America is spending a lot of money right now, and their economy is suffering and struggling. And the events in the Middle East have contributed to the problem in Ukraine because the cost of the war escalated. The amount of damage Iran did to Israel has also caused concern. And much of this money is obviously going to be recovered by the American taxpayer, who is going to have to dig deep. They're going to have to rebuild Gaza. They're going to have to rebuild Tel Aviv and Beersheba and all these other cities. That money is money that would have been used to assist the Ukraine. And already Zelensky and Trump simply don't have a good rapport, whether they're on the same side or not. They do not have a good rapport. And many of his members of his party do not like Zelensky, some of his base, some of MAGA, and there's a lot of bad publicity around him. And once your main provider of weapons and resources backs down on you, yes, you're screwed. So that is the position that Ukraine finds itself. It does not have the resources to sustain these kind of losses. F-16 jets are good, but they're not the top jets. They're better jets than that. They can't afford the top jets. That's a clear problem because you're facing Russia and they have their MiGs. I don't know what level, whether they're still able to compete with Western combat aircraft. But I
No,
do
no, no.
think
MiGs,
that
MiGs are Soviet era airplanes. They can't compete with modern day technology.
but Russia has modern aircraft now. I mean, they're a superpower. I'm just saying MiGs about, but I'm thinking back
But
to the Cold
MiGs,
War. But
Is Ukraine using MiGs? No, no, they're not. Yeah.
no, Russia doesn't use MiGs anymore. I
Yeah.
probably have to do my research on the weapons or modern
Well, I'm saying
weaponry
is
that
Ukraine
Russia
using
uses.
them from the old Soviet Union days or something, some rubbish. Yeah.
Yes, but I don't believe that you can win a war
Doesn't
without
matter
air
because Russia is
superiority.
beating them with drones. So here's what it says. Just Sunday, Ukrainian authorities said Russia had launched 477 drones and decoys, as well as 60 missiles of various types at Ukraine overnight. The country's Air Force said it shot down 211 drones out of the 477, with another 255 straying before hitting their targets. In reality, it's hitting them hard. Air defenses intercepted one, so they're trying to paint it better, but they hit them hard. They're pummeling them, and this goes back to how wars change. You don't even need MiGs or planes. Russia is also moving to a new. Because remember, Russia doesn't want to overtake all of Ukraine. If they wanted to do that, they would have to do some more bombarding with airplanes. But what they're doing is a slow war in which they they use missiles and stuff to destroy key strategic areas, and they just keep on marching and using artillery. This is an artillery war for Russia, which means it's going to take a longer time. But the artillery war will be slow and slogging. And meanwhile, the morale in Ukraine keeps going down. Food is too expensive. The country is, I mean, Ukrainians are surviving, but they're living bare existence. And when winter comes, is going to be worse. So I think they're saying now that the Europeans, they said that even silently, the Ukrainians, according to this article by the Financial Times, internally they're asking for a ceasefire. You know what they say you don't do? It's like you're losing a battle and somebody has you pinned on the ground and your elbow hurts, your ankle hurts, your everything. Referee, end this shit. I'm serious. They can't win. It's okay, the Ukrainians are very brave people and they can be patriotic. But after 3 years of you can't even go out and buy ice cream and hang out with your girlfriend and listen to R&B and get blowjobs and cars and fingered. You have to be in military mode. People are tired.
Yeah,
they're tired.
They're exhausted. They're exhausted.
Yeah, they get it over with. You gave it your best shot. It didn't work. What are your thoughts?
And now Russia, the military arm of BRICS, really. Once it's out of that Ukraine war, it'll be able to divert its attentions and resources elsewhere.
To the Middle East, yeah.
Yes.
And to Africa too. Yeah.
And Africa.
Afabi. Yeah, basically, I looked at the summit and basically the summit focused more on appeasing Donald Trump than aiding Ukraine. The leaders scrambling to meet the defense demands. NATO's unity is under strain. And it's being politicized. Politics is taking precedence over battlefield needs. And Ukraine is being politically sidelined. They are not even the priority now when NATO sits to discuss issues. Zelensky got minimal attention at the summit. And if you look at it, basically what U.S. goal was from the beginning was to weaken Russia, not to give Ukraine victory. So the misalignment risks turning Ukraine into a proxy battleground and not a strategic partner. They are turning Ukraine into a proxy battleground, and they are not a strategic partner. And from the get-go, Russia is supposed to have been weakened, not advocating victory for Ukraine.
To be honest with you, so all of this for the past since I would say since 2016. When Trump first came in, Trump was supposed to be not pro, but good towards Putin. But the Democrats, since Trump left, all of this has been a war against, since when Biden came in, has been a war against Russia. And the strategy is to weaken Russia with Ukraine so that they become weak and then go after China and also weaken Iran. They're trying to destroy BRICS and beat Russia and China. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You cannot beat Russia and China in a prolonged proxy war. You can't beat them directly. You can't beat them in any kind of war. The only war that Europe can beat Russia in is if Russia attacks Europe or attacks America so they can defend themselves, because it's very hard to beat. But they're not going to weaken Russia. What they're doing is weakening themselves. I don't know if the strategists in Europe and America know what they're doing. Nothing that they're doing makes sense. The attack to Iran brought down their biggest ally, Israel. Israel is in disarray now because of that political disarray, and it's been shown that the Iron Dome doesn't work. Ukraine is messed up. Meanwhile, Europe had to sacrifice its whole economy to help Ukraine. So they've lost their mind. They need to give up and realize that the only way you can deal with Russia and China and these countries is through trade and competition. But if you're going to compete, you're going to have to ask yourself deep questions about how your countries are going to be functioning internally. Can you become productive like China and Russia? In order for you to do that, your country has to go back to work, produce things, and figure out some sort of miracle because they don't have raw materials. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah.
So I guess in short, what I'm saying is that you're not going to beat Russia and China. The best you can do is to build your own economies and compete with them. That's what I mean. What do you think, Afolabi?
Yeah. You're not going to beat Russia or China. And Russia is master at war of attrition. And if you look at the way they are, the constant drone and missile attacks, they are degrading Ukraine's forces over time. Not just taking the land. Russia's economic mobilization shows it's ready for a long, grinding war. It's a war of attrition. And when it comes to strategic, long, chess-like battles, Russia always thrives. And
yes.
Yes, and the way it is now, Washington's priority is to exhaust Russia, not necessarily to help Ukraine. And Washington looks at all the cards on the ground. It appears that now, if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, Gaza and everything, Washington can ill afford financial commitment to this kind of campaign. So, yeah. And you look back at the meeting with Donald Trump and Zelensky, and Donald Trump was offering an olive branch to Zelensky, but it seems to be adamant because the way it is now, Zelensky is basically screwed. There's nothing he can do because US is reluctant. NATO is divided. So where does the help come from? That's where I find it difficult to understand what Zelensky's trust lies on.
Yeah, he was a fool. Kissinger said it. They said it's dangerous to be an enemy of America. It's fatal to be a friend of America. And Europe should note that because Europe will be next. America is a selfish country which will throw anybody under the bus. So they don't mind sacrificing Europe's economy and even emboldening Europe to go to war with Russia or to continue spending all of its money on military trying to help Ukraine. All it's going to do is destroy Europe. So if the Europeans are smart, they'll pay very close attention to what happens to American friends. Afghanistan, even Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was a friend of America. They used him to fight Iran. It never ends well for friends of America. It never ends well. So the best thing to do is to not to fight America, but just to don't let them fool you. They're trying to fool Taiwan into going to war with China. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No. Taiwan couldn't even beat Nigeria in a war. No. And we have, I'm not trying to diss Nigeria. We have
they would. What do we have?
Their manufacturing power.
They have technology. They have technology. But my point is that nobody can attack China. Now, on neutral ground, maybe the U.S. might be able to beat China on neutral ground. But if they try to attack China, millions of Americans will die. And if they use Taiwan as a proxy, Taiwan will wish it had never existed. I'm serious. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense to even contemplate thinking about invading China. If you even went to sleep and dreamt about invading China, you better wake up and apologize because China is just not on. Just forget about it. When we go back to the situation in Ukraine, what is happening is Russia is going to get the parity and the justice that it had been seeking in respect of Ukraine and Georgia, and making sure these people do not get nuclear weapons, do not join NATO and put nuclear weapons on their doorstep. Europe seems to be hell-bent on not allowing that to happen, with or without America. And Europe seems to be playing this waiting game. And they're probably going to look at Ukraine like they're Poland of World War II, that they have to wait. But you see, they cannot defeat Russia. And even though Russia don't have the technological advantage, Russia develops technology during warfare, during the war. the Germans were ahead of them, and then suddenly they launched T-34s, and they were as good as anything the Germans had, and suddenly they were on and they're on the back foot. Russia has that ability, and they are now fighting the cheap technology war. This is about drones and missiles. It's not about aircraft carriers and expensive fighter jets and training personnel to manage G-forces. Now all of that can be wiped off with some fat guy sitting in a bunker flying something. He's not experiencing the G-forces, so he can get the plane to do all sorts of things, depending on where we get to technology. And he might be able to fly it better than a human because he doesn't have the drawbacks of a human. And it'll be cheap. It carries more ordnance, and that is the way of future warfare. And all of the money that America has spent on its expensive high tech is actually going to become obsolete. Sort of the way they built the Maginot Line after World War One and sunk all the weapons, and then the tank came and made it obsolete overnight. And I fear that the aircraft carrier and aircraft are going to be overtaken by cheap technology that flies. And when that happens, what will happen is you can level the place. You still have to put boots on the ground to control the region. No amount of air superiority will give you power unless you put boots on the ground. And so this is what drone warfare is. Drone warfare is actually challenging the question about whether you need an air force. We saw Iran take on Israel. They didn't use a single plane that I'm aware of. I don't think they fueled a single plane to shoot down F-35s. If those were F-16s, they would have come down like flies because they're easier to shoot down than F-35s. Sure. And they took these F-35s down. They've taken, and then they've given Israel right back. And now they're probably going to look at their surface-to-air missile defense systems because now they've realized that where they're vulnerable is not offensively but defensively. And they supply Russia. And you can see what Russia has managed to do with these drones to overwhelm Ukraine. Ukraine has also got its drones of its own, but it doesn't seem to be as effective. I think when it comes to drone and missile technology,
not effective.
Yeah. When it comes to drone and missile technology, BRICS countries are ahead of G7 right now.
So here's the only answer to all of this is that the U.S. and Britain and the West are not really interested in winning wars. So what they're interested in is getting billing for making weapons so that they can continue, so that their rich people can make money. So in other words, their objective is not to beat Russia. I don't think their objective is to beat Russia or to beat China. Yeah. Their objective is to continue talking about we have this technology, all these weapons. They make weapons which they'll never use just so that they can. For example, one stealth plane cost like $1 billion. I promise you that 700 million of that goes into the pockets of the CEO. Whereas China,
if your population
China, Russia, and Iran, China, Russia, and Iran, they're doing a cheap war because they have to survive. So they're using cheap methods because they can't afford to wear out all their resources. And the way their cheap warfare is actually more effective, and where they're putting their technologies with the missiles. The U.S. does not have hypersonic missiles. China, Korea, Iran, and Russia have hypersonic. So the U.S. is not investing in missile warfare, which is the most effective, because it doesn't create a lot of money for their corporate benefactors. So their corporate benefactors are making all these crazy wars and these iron domes just so that they can enjoy money. So my point being is that what Europe is doing is, and what America is doing, is that they're making their countries poorer by taking their wealth to create false idea of war. They say, Russia and China are out to get to us. That way they can get the money. It's like me coming to Ukraine and say, Daddy, can I have money? I say, why? Because next door, the guy wants to beat me, so I have to go and buy 15 guns. And then you take the money and you go and buy Suya. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what the American people and what the Europeans are doing is saying Russia is dangerous, China is dangerous. Oh, yeah, bring money. We need to take your money so we can protect you. Then when it's time for the war to go, like with Israel, where's Israel's Iron Dome now? Where was the money that was spent? Where's the dome? It was all a lie just to make money. I'll end with that. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Basically, the way I see it,
I wanted to,
people are getting tired of the war.
Yeah.
The UK, France, And even the United States, they're tired of the war. They're worried about their own internal problems, high prices, jobs. This makes leaders less willing to send help to Ukraine. NATO doesn't send weapons as a group. Instead, countries help separately. So this
England and France, that's about it, in Germany.
So this causes confusion and slows Ukraine down. There's no clear promise to Ukraine. So NATO keeps saying it supports Ukraine, but hasn't let it join. This makes Ukraine feel uncertain and vulnerable. So
no, they don't want them to join
because it's basically screwed. I don't know how they get out.
Why would they don't want to bring in Ukraine, because if they do that, then they'll have to defend them from Charter 5, which they don't want to do. What were you going to say, Kule?
Yeah, so what I was going to say is another problem that Europe has is that the population is not behind this war with Ukraine. They were initially, but they're not anymore. If your population is not behind you, you can't win any wars. You saw Russia pull out of World War One because the Tsar was overthrown because it was an unpopular war. You've seen Vietnam America pull out of Vietnam because it was an unpopular war. On the flip side, you've seen Russia take 20 million casualties and still fight back against the Germans. You've seen the Chinese take equally high casualties against the Japanese and still fight back because the population was motivated to fight back. There is no motivation from the Western populations to fight any wars. And the two major areas of war, which are the Middle East and the Ukraine, the politics of it, the people are not behind it. They do not see the scaremongering that the governments are trying to put before them. And they're beginning to see better. They're beginning to see through all the nonsense that's going on now. So they can see through the lies of their governments, and they know that they're not going to fall for it. And when you cannot sustain popularity for a war, you simply cannot win it, because wars take time and you need to keep motivating blood to come on the battlefield.
And there's no motivation because the people, if Russia beats Ukraine, it doesn't change my life one bit. It doesn't make my life threatened anyway. World. Same thing with Europe. So they need to, I guess the citizens of these countries need to stand up and say no more of this, rather than worry about like how in the U.S. where they're fighting over immigrants getting kicked out, which is important. But what's more important is survival of all these countries and their economies. Okay, thanks, guys. Very good show. Take us out of Falabi.
Yeah, so NATO is too slow and divided. There's no cooperation. The alliance says it supports Ukraine, but its actions are too weak or too late, and it's making the war harder for Ukraine to win. And it's on this note that myself, Mustafa, and Kule would round up this show. We'll be back sometime next week.
All right, thanks. So, Kule, are you off tomorrow morning, or are you free? I know you had a busy day today.
I'm free tomorrow. I thought I was in court, but I'm not, so I'm free tomorrow.
Okay, so yes, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk more maybe about Glastonbury and all that, but I have to go to work.
I'm reasonably free most of the day, so